The night my son-in-law told me I was no longer welcome in his house, I thought I had finally discovered the truth about him. I thought Daniel Carter had been waiting for the right moment to get rid of me. What I didn't know was that 3 days later, that same man would call me with a trembling voice and beg me to come back. And by the time I understood why, I would wish I had never opened the door to his secret in the first place. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. Tell us your city or country. We love knowing where these stories are reaching you from. My name is Robert Hayes, and I was 68 years old when my daughter asked me to move into her home in Ohio. I had spent most of my adult life working in construction, building houses for other people, while my wife, Margaret, built the home that actually mattered to me. We had been married for 43 years. When she died, the silence inside our house became unbearable. For 6 months, I barely touched anything. Her coffee mug remained beside the kitchen sink. Her favorite blue sweater stayed hanging behind the bedroom door. Even the little wooden bird she kept on the windowsill remained exactly where she had left it. Then Emily called. "Dad, you shouldn't be alone anymore," she said. I told her I was managing. She laughed softly. "You always say that when you're not." 2 weeks later, I packed 2 suitcases and drove to Emily and Daniel's house. At first, everything felt surprisingly normal. Emily hugged me at the door and cried into my shoulder. Daniel shook my hand and told me I should stay as long as I needed. "Your family," he said. I believed him. For the first few weeks, Daniel was considerate. He brought home groceries, helped me carry my boxes upstairs, and even fixed the old watch Margaret had given me on our 30th anniversary. But slowly, something changed. Daniel stopped sitting with us at dinner. When Emily and I talked in the kitchen, he would suddenly appear and ask what we were discussing. He began locking the door to his home office. And whenever I walked into a room, conversations seemed to end. I tried not to take it personally. Then, one Thursday evening, I heard Emily and Daniel arguing behind their bedroom door. I couldn't make out every word, but I clearly heard Daniel say, "Your father cannot know." My heart tightened. The next morning, I asked Emily what they had been arguing about. "Nothing," she said too quickly. "Emily, I heard you." Her face went pale. Before she could answer, Daniel walked into the kitchen. He looked directly at me. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then he said quietly, "Robert, we need to talk tonight." That evening, Emily wasn't home. Daniel sat across from me at the dining table. His expression was unusually serious. "I think it's time you found somewhere else to stay." I stared at him. "What?" "You heard me." I looked toward the empty chair where Emily usually sat. "Does my daughter know you're saying this?" Daniel lowered his eyes. "That doesn't matter." But as I stood up, I noticed something on his phone lying on the table. A message had just appeared. I only saw 6 words before the screen went dark. "He still doesn't know about the money." Daniel immediately grabbed the phone. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't about me overstaying my welcome. Something had happened behind my back, something involving my daughter. And somehow, I was the last person who was supposed to find out. The next morning, I woke up with one question pounding through my head. What money were they talking about? Daniel had thrown me out of the house the night before, but now I understood that my leaving had nothing to do with space, privacy, or family tension. Someone was hiding something from me, and judging by the fear I had seen on Emily's face, whatever it was could destroy more than just a marriage. I packed my suitcase slowly, pretending everything was normal. I didn't want Daniel to know that I had seen his phone. I didn't want Emily to know either. I had learned something during my years in construction. When a wall suddenly develops a crack, you don't immediately start tearing it down. First, you find out what's holding it together. Before I continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening from in the comments. Tell us your city or country because it means a lot to know where these stories are reaching you from. I carried my suitcase downstairs around 8 in the morning. Emily was already in the kitchen, standing beside the coffee maker. She looked exhausted. "Dad, where are you going?" she asked. Daniel said I should find somewhere else to stay. Her hand froze around the coffee mug. "He said that," I nodded. She looked toward the hallway as if she expected Daniel to appear. "Dad, please don't make this harder." "Harder for whom?" I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked over and hugged me. It was a strange hug, short, nervous, almost guilty. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too, that's why I'm asking you what's happening." She pulled away and wiped her eyes. "There's nothing you need to worry about." I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't forget the message on Daniel's phone. I left the house and checked into a small hotel 20 minutes away. I spent most of the morning sitting beside the window, watching traffic move through the rainy Ohio streets. By noon, I had convinced myself to leave everything alone. Maybe Emily had made a financial mistake. Maybe Daniel was dealing with it. Maybe the best thing I could do was give them space. Then I remembered Margaret's voice. She had always told me that ignoring a problem didn't make it disappear. Around 3 in the afternoon, Emily called. "Dad, did you take everything from the house?" "Almost. You forgot something." "What?" She hesitated. "Mom's old photo album." I told her I'd come back for it. She immediately said no. "I'll bring it to you." That reaction bothered me. The photo album was in the upstairs hallway, inside a small wooden cabinet. I had never seen anything dangerous about it. Why didn't she want me coming back? An hour later, Emily arrived at the hotel carrying the album. But when she handed it to me, a small brass key fell from between the pages and landed on the carpet. She stared at it. "What's that?" I asked. "I don't know." I picked it up. It looked familiar. Then I remembered seeing a small locked drawer inside Daniel's office. The same kind of brass lock was attached to it. "Emily," I said carefully, "where did this come from?" She looked frightened. "Dad, don't use that key." "Why?" "Because some things are better left alone." She stood up and headed for the door. "Emily," she stopped. "What money was Daniel talking about last night?" Her shoulders stiffened. She didn't turn around. "I can't tell you." Then she walked out. That night I sat alone in the hotel room with the brass key in my palm. I had two choices: respect my daughter's warning or find out why she was so afraid of that little piece of metal. I chose the second. The following morning, I drove back toward their house. I wasn't going there to argue with Daniel. I wasn't even going there to confront Emily. I was going there for one reason: to open that locked drawer. And when I finally saw what was inside, I realized the money wasn't the most frightening thing they had been hiding from me. It was the name written on the envelope beneath it. I thought the locked drawer would contain bank statements, secret contracts, or proof that Daniel had been stealing from my daughter. I was prepared to discover something ugly. I wasn't prepared to see my late wife's handwriting on an envelope that had been hidden inside that drawer for years. And when I read the name written across the front, I felt the ground disappear beneath me. Before I tell you what that name was, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. Your city or country could be thousands of miles away from mine, but stories like this have a strange way of finding people who understand them. I arrived at Emily and Daniel's house just after 10 the next morning. Daniel's truck was gone, and Emily had texted me earlier saying she would be at work until late afternoon. I used the spare key Emily had given me months ago, telling myself I wasn't breaking into my own daughter's home. I was simply trying to understand why the people I loved were keeping something from me. Upstairs, Daniel's office door was locked. I took out the little brass key and held my breath as I slid it into the lock. It turned immediately. Inside, everything looked exactly as it had before. A desk, two bookshelves, a filing cabinet, and the framed photograph of Emily and Daniel from their wedding day. I walked toward the desk and opened the top drawer. Nothing. I checked the second drawer, receipts and old insurance papers. Then I saw the small wooden drawer built into the side of the desk. The brass lock looked identical to the key in my hand. My fingers were shaking when I inserted it. Click. The drawer opened. There were 3 envelopes, a bank folder, and a small black notebook. I picked up the bank folder first. The first statement showed a transfer of $38,500 from an account belonging to Emily. The money hadn't gone to Daniel. It had gone to a company called North Valley Recovery Services. I had never heard of it. The second statement showed another transfer, then another. Over the previous 11 months, Emily had sent more than $91,000 to that company. I felt sick. Why would my daughter secretly send that much money somewhere? I opened the black notebook. Most of the pages contained dates and amounts, but one sentence appeared repeatedly: "Keep Dad out of this." My heart sank. Then I noticed the envelopes. One was addressed to Daniel. Another had Emily's name. The third was different. It had been sealed with old-fashioned red wax, and written across the front in unmistakable handwriting were the words, "For Robert when he is finally ready." I knew that handwriting. Margaret's, my wife, had been dead for almost 2 years. I sat down heavily in Daniel's chair. My hands trembled as I turned the envelope over. It wasn't dated. There was no explanation for why Margaret had written it or how it had ended up in Daniel's locked drawer. I carefully broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Robert, if you are reading this, then something has happened that I prayed would never happen. Please don't judge Emily too quickly. She made a mistake, but Daniel knows the truth. He promised me he would protect her, even if it meant you hated him." I stopped reading. My breathing became shallow. Margaret had known something before she died, something involving Emily and Daniel, something serious enough that she had trusted my son-in-law instead of me. I continued reading. "There is one thing you must understand. The money isn't being stolen. It is being used to repair damage that Emily believes she caused. She will never tell you because she thinks you will blame yourself." I stared at the page, completely confused. What damage? What mistake could cost more than $90,000? Then I turned the paper over and found one final sentence. "If you want the whole truth, ask Michael Reed what happened on October 14. I hadn't spoken to Michael, my former business partner, in nearly 6 years. October 14 meant nothing to me, but Margaret had written that date deliberately. I folded the letter and slipped it into my jacket. Then I heard a car pull into the driveway. I looked through the office window. Daniel had returned. And he wasn't alone. A woman was sitting in the passenger seat. The moment I saw her face, I knew exactly who she was. She was the woman whose name appeared on the bank statements, and somehow she was connected to the secret Margaret had taken to her grave. I had never seen the woman sitting beside Daniel before, but the moment she stepped out of his car, something about her face felt strangely familiar. She wasn't young. She looked to be in her early 50s, dressed in a gray coat, carrying a leather folder against her chest. Daniel glanced toward the upstairs window, and for one terrifying second, I wondered if he had seen me. I ducked away from the glass and held Margaret's letter against my chest. I had come looking for answers, but now I had more questions than ever. Who was this woman? Why was Emily sending thousands of dollars to her company? And why had Margaret warned me not to judge Daniel? Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Your city, state, or country might be far away, but every comment reminds us that these stories reach real people with real families and real memories. I quietly left Daniel's office and went downstairs. I didn't want him to know I had found the letter yet. As I reached the front door, I heard Daniel speaking in the hallway. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I had no choice," the woman replied. "The payment is late again." I froze. Daniel lowered his voice. "I'll handle it. You said that last month." There was a long silence. Then she asked, "Does Robert know?" My heart nearly stopped. Daniel answered immediately, "No, and he can't know." I stepped outside before they could see me. I walked down the street and called a taxi instead of confronting them. I needed distance. I needed time to think. More importantly, I needed Michael Reed. Michael had been my business partner for almost 20 years. We had built houses together, argued over contracts, celebrated Christmas parties together, and eventually gone our separate ways after retiring. I hadn't spoken to him since Margaret's funeral. I called his number from memory. He answered on the fourth ring. "Robert," his voice sounded surprised. "Michael, I need to ask you about October 14. There was silence, too much silence. "Where did you hear that date?" he finally asked. "My wife left me a letter." Another pause. "Then you should come see me." We met at a diner outside town. Michael looked older than I remembered. His hair had turned completely gray, and he kept rubbing his wedding ring as if he were nervous. I placed Margaret's letter on the table. He read it without touching it. When he finished, he looked at me and said, "I always wondered if Margaret would tell you." "Tell me what?" Michael leaned forward. "On October 14, 4 years ago, Emily came to my office." I felt my stomach tighten. "Why?" "She had made a serious mistake." "What kind of mistake?" He shook his head. "I promised Margaret I wouldn't tell you unless she gave me permission." "She's dead, Michael." His eyes dropped. "I know." I pressed my hands against the table. "Then tell me." Michael finally spoke. Emily had taken money from the company account. I stared at him. How much? $120,000. My first instinct was disbelief. Emily had never been involved in my business finances. She had her own career, her own life. Why would she do that? Michael's answer was barely audible. Because someone was threatening her. I felt a coldness move through my chest. Who? Michael looked around the diner before answering. That's the part you don't understand, Robert. Emily didn't steal that money for herself. She was trying to stop someone from destroying Daniel. I couldn't speak. Michael continued. Daniel had gotten involved with the wrong people years ago. Emily discovered it and thought she could fix everything by paying them off. She made the mistake of believing the problem would disappear. I remembered the woman in Daniel's car. Who is she? Michael's face changed. If you're talking about Sarah Bennett, then you need to stay away from her. Why? Michael leaned closer. Because Sarah isn't the person you think she is. I thought of the bank statements, the hidden drawer, Margaret's letter, and the words written in Daniel's notebook. None of it made sense anymore. Then Michael said something that left me speechless. Robert, the $91,000 wasn't being sent to Sarah's company to protect Daniel. It was being used to pay someone who had been watching your daughter for years. I stared at him. Who? Michael didn't answer. Instead, he pulled an old photograph from his wallet and placed it on the table. It showed Emily standing beside a man I had never seen before. On the back was a date, October 14. And underneath it, in Margaret's handwriting, were 4 words that made my blood run cold. This is who started it. The man standing beside my daughter in that photograph was a stranger to me, but the look on Emily's face told me he had once been anything but a stranger to her. She wasn't smiling. She looked frightened, almost trapped. I stared at the photograph until the edges began to blur. Margaret had written 4 words on the back. This is who started it. I couldn't stop wondering what she meant. Had this man threatened Emily? Had he caused the financial problems? And why had my wife known about him without ever telling me? Before I continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. Tell us your city or country. Every comment helps us know that these stories are reaching people who enjoy emotional family mysteries like this one. I looked at Michael. Who is he? Michael took a slow breath. His name is Victor Lawson. The name meant nothing to me. What does he want with my daughter? Michael folded his hands on the table. 4 years ago, Victor approached Emily because of Daniel. What did Daniel do? That's complicated. I don't have time for complicated. Michael looked toward the window. Daniel used to work for a company that handled private security contracts. One of their clients was Victor. My stomach tightened. And Victor was involved in things Daniel didn't fully understand. When Daniel tried to walk away, Victor threatened him. I thought about Daniel's cold behavior, the locked office, the money, and the woman in his car. Suddenly, the pieces seemed to connect. But one question remained. Why would Emily take money from my company? Michael looked ashamed. Because she thought she could protect Daniel by paying Victor. And Margaret knew? Yes, I leaned back. For years, I had believed my wife had died without leaving any major secrets behind. Now I was discovering she had carried an entire hidden world inside her. Why didn't she tell me? I asked. Michael's expression softened. Because she was afraid you would blame yourself. I laughed bitterly. I'm her father, I would have helped her. That's exactly why she kept quiet. Michael slid another photograph across the table. This one showed Daniel standing outside a courthouse. Daniel wasn't innocent, he said, but he wasn't the villain either. I studied the picture. Daniel looked younger, thinner, and exhausted. What happened at the courthouse? Michael lowered his voice. Daniel was prepared to testify against Victor. I looked up. Then why didn't he? Because Victor threatened Emily. Everything inside me went still. Michael continued. Daniel withdrew his statement. Emily started paying money. Margaret became involved because she discovered what was happening. And now? I asked. Now Victor wants more. I suddenly understood the message I'd seen on Daniel's phone. The money wasn't simply disappearing. Someone was demanding it. Then why did Daniel throw me out? I asked. Michael looked at me for a long moment. Because Victor knows you're investigating. My blood ran cold. How would he know? Michael didn't answer. Instead, he asked me a question. Robert, did you notice anyone following you recently? I thought about the black SUV I had seen outside the hotel that morning. At the time, I had assumed it was nothing. Now I wasn't so sure. Maybe, I whispered. Michael nodded. Then you need to stop digging. I stood up. I can't. Why? Because my daughter is in danger. Michael grabbed my wrist before I could leave. Robert, listen to me. The person you should be worried about isn't Victor. I stared at him. Then who? Michael's face turned pale. Someone much closer to Emily. I left the diner with the photograph in my pocket and drove toward the hotel. Halfway there, my phone rang. It was Emily. I answered immediately. She didn't say hello. I heard her breathing rapidly. Then she whispered, "Dad, please don't trust Daniel." Before I could ask why, the call ended. I called back 3 times. No answer. Then a text appeared on my screen from an unknown number. "If you want your daughter safe, stop asking questions." I stared at those words for several seconds. But there was something else that frightened me even more. The message contained a photograph taken only minutes earlier. It showed me sitting inside the diner with Michael. Whoever sent it had been watching me, and they knew exactly where I was. The photograph on my phone changed everything. Whoever had taken it had been close enough to see me sitting with Michael, yet I hadn't noticed anyone watching. Worse, the message had arrived immediately after Emily warned me not to trust Daniel. For the first time, I wondered whether my son-in-law had been telling the truth all along. Maybe he wasn't trying to get rid of me because he hated me. Maybe he was trying to keep me away from something dangerous. But then, why had Emily told me not to trust him? Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. Tell us your city or country. Your comments help us know that you're here, and they make these stories feel like a conversation rather than something I'm telling into an empty room. I drove back to the hotel and parked underground instead of leaving my car outside. I sat there for nearly 10 minutes, staring at the unknown number. My first instinct was to call it. I didn't. If someone was watching me, giving them a direct connection to my phone would be foolish. I went upstairs, locked the door, closed the curtains, and spread everything I had collected across the bed. Margaret's letter, the photograph of Emily and Victor, the bank statements, Michael's warning, Daniel's message, Emily's final words, none of them fit together cleanly. I kept returning to one question. Why would Emily tell me not to trust Daniel if Daniel was actually protecting her? I decided to call Sarah Bennett, the woman I had seen with Daniel. I found her number through an old document from Emily's files. She answered after several rings. "Who is this?" "Robert Hayes." Silence. "I need to ask you about Emily." Her voice immediately became cautious. "You shouldn't be calling me." "Why?" "Because Daniel told me to stay away from you." "What does Daniel know?" She hesitated. "More than you think." "Then tell me the truth." Sarah sighed. "Robert, Emily has been paying money for a long time because she believes she owes someone a debt, but the debt isn't financial." I sat down. "What does that mean?" "It means someone has something that could destroy her life." "What?" Sarah refused to answer. Instead, she asked, "Did you find Margaret's letter?" My heart stopped. "How do you know about that?" She didn't respond. "Sarah," the line went dead. I immediately called back, but the number had been disconnected. I stared at my phone, realizing something that frightened me more than the threats. Sarah knew about Margaret's letter before I had told anyone. That meant Margaret's secret had involved more people than I had imagined. I called Michael again. He answered immediately. "Robert, where are you?" "At the hotel." "Leave." "Why?" "Because someone just asked me where you were staying." I stood up. "Who?" "I don't know, but they knew about our conversation." I grabbed my jacket. "Michael, what aren't you telling me?" He was silent. "Michael." Finally, he said, "There was another person involved when Emily took the money." "Who?" "Your wife." "I already know Margaret knew." "No, Robert, you don't understand. Margaret didn't just know, she was part of the plan." I couldn't breathe. "What plan?" Michael said quietly. "The plan to make Victor believe Emily had disappeared." I felt dizzy. Margaret had been dead for almost 2 years. How could she have been part of something that was still happening? Then I remembered something from her letter. "If you are reading this, something has happened that I prayed would never happen." Maybe she hadn't been talking about the past. Maybe she had been preparing me for something that was going to happen after her death. I rushed back to my car and drove toward Emily's house. I needed answers from her directly, but when I reached the neighborhood, I saw police lights flashing outside the house. My heart dropped. 2 officers stood near the driveway, while Daniel was being questioned beside his truck. Emily was nowhere in sight. I pulled over and ran toward them. Daniel looked at me, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. He stepped toward me and whispered, "Robert, don't say anything." "Where's Emily?" He looked toward the house. "She's gone." "What do you mean, gone?" Daniel swallowed hard. "Someone took her." Then one of the officers turned toward me and asked, "Mr. Hayes, when was the last time you spoke to your daughter?" I opened my mouth, but before I could answer, Daniel said something that made me realize this was much worse than I had imagined. "Tell them everything, Robert, because if they don't find Emily tonight, we may never see her again." The police officer's question hung in the air while Daniel stood beside me, his face drained of color. "Tell them everything, Robert," he had said, but there was one thing I still couldn't understand. If Daniel truly cared about Emily, why had he spent weeks keeping secrets from me? Why had he pushed me out of his house? And why had Emily warned me not to trust him only hours before she disappeared? Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you are listening from. Tell us your city or country. I read your comments, and knowing where you're watching from makes these stories even more meaningful. The officer introduced himself as Detective Harris and asked me to step inside. The house looked completely different from the home I had left only days earlier. A lamp had been knocked over in the living room. One of Emily's kitchen chairs was lying on its side. Her purse was on the floor near the back door, its contents scattered across the tiles. "When did you last speak with your daughter?" Detective Harris asked. "This afternoon," I said. "She called me and told me not to trust Daniel." Daniel immediately looked at me. "She said that?" "Yes." His jaw tightened. "Did she tell you why?" "No." The call ended suddenly. Detective Harris wrote something down. "What happened after that?" I told him about the diner, Michael, the photograph, and the threatening message. I didn't leave anything out. When I mentioned Victor Lawson, the detective's expression changed. "You know that name?" I asked. "Unfortunately." He closed his notebook. "Victor Lawson has been connected to several investigations over the last few years. Nothing we could prove in court, but his name keeps appearing around intimidation cases." I looked at Daniel. "Then why didn't you tell me?" Daniel looked exhausted. "Because telling you would have put you in danger. You threw me out. Because Victor was watching the house. You could have told me that." Daniel's eyes filled with frustration. "And what would you have done? You would have confronted him. You would have tried to protect Emily. That's exactly what Victor wanted." I didn't have an answer. Detective Harris interrupted. "Mr. Carter, when did you last see Emily?" Daniel looked toward the hallway. "Around 6. And after that, she said she needed to go somewhere. Did she tell you where?" "No." I stepped forward. "That's not true." Daniel looked at me. "What?" "She told me she was afraid of you." His face fell. "Robert, she was afraid of what would happen if you learned the truth." Detective Harris asked. "What truth?" Daniel hesitated. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Emily left this on the kitchen counter." He handed it to the detective, who read it silently before passing it to me. It was Emily's handwriting. "Dad, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I know you think Daniel is the problem. He isn't, but I can't explain everything yet. Please don't look for me. Trust the person who has been trying to keep you away from this." I read the last line twice. "Trust the person who has been trying to keep you away from this." I looked at Daniel. "You?" He shook his head. "I don't know." Detective Harris took the note back. "There's something else." He led us toward the garage. Emily's car was still parked inside. The driver's door was open. On the seat was her phone. I stared at it in disbelief. "She never went anywhere," I whispered. Detective Harris nodded. "Exactly." Then he pointed to the floor. There were muddy footprints leading from the side entrance toward the garage. One set belonged to Emily. The other set was larger. I crouched down and studied them. One shoe had a distinctive pattern across the sole. I had seen that pattern before. My mind immediately returned to the photograph from the diner. Someone had been sitting at the table behind me that afternoon. I hadn't noticed his face, but I remembered his boots. "Detective," I said, "I know where you need to look." He turned toward me. "Where?" I pointed toward the driveway. "The man in the photograph." Daniel suddenly grabbed my arm. "Robert, don't." "Why?" He looked terrified. "Because if I'm right about who took Emily, then Victor isn't the person we should be looking for." Before Detective Harris could ask another question, a black SUV slowly passed the house. Daniel watched it through the garage window. His face went completely white. "That's him," he whispered. "Who?" I asked. Daniel didn't answer. He simply said, "The man who has been watching Emily isn't Victor Lawson." Then he looked directly at me and added, "It's someone you already know." The moment Daniel told me the man watching Emily was someone I already knew, every face from my past seemed to flash through my mind. Michael, Sarah. Someone from my old construction company. For years, I had believed I knew the people around my family. But that night, standing inside Emily's garage while a black SUV disappeared down the street, I realized how little I actually knew. And then Daniel said a name that made my entire body go cold. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Tell us your city or country, because you never know which part of the world someone is hearing this story from. Detective Harris immediately stepped outside, but the SUV was already gone. He called another patrol car and gave them the description, while Daniel remained beside me. I turned toward him. "You said I know this man. Who is he?" Daniel rubbed both hands over his face. "I don't know if you're ready to hear it. My daughter is missing. I'm ready for anything." He looked at me. "Michael Reed." I stared at him. "That's impossible." Michael had been my friend and business partner for nearly 20 years. He had helped me build my company from nothing. He had stood beside me at Margaret's funeral. He had been the person I trusted when everyone else walked away. "You're lying," I said. Daniel shook his head. "I wish I were." Detective Harris returned. "What's going on?" I told him what Daniel had said. The detective's expression became serious. "Where is Michael now?" I gave him the address. He immediately called another officer. I couldn't stop thinking about our meeting at the diner. Michael had known about Margaret's letter. He had known about Emily. He had warned me someone was watching. And somehow, he had been sitting with me while that same person photographed us. Maybe he wasn't warning me. Maybe he was making sure I followed the trail he wanted me to follow. "Why would Michael take Emily?" I asked Daniel. "He didn't take her," Daniel said. "At least I don't think he did." "Then why are you naming him?" Daniel looked toward the floor. "Because Michael has been working with Victor for years." My stomach twisted. "What?" Daniel explained that after he refused to continue working for Victor, someone had to keep the financial operation alive. Michael had stepped in. Emily discovered it and tried to expose him. That was when the threats began. "Then why did Margaret trust Michael?" I asked. Daniel looked away. "She didn't." I froze. "What do you mean?" "Margaret suspected him." Suddenly, the letter made sense in a way I hadn't wanted it to. Margaret had written, "Ask Michael Reed what happened on October 14. She hadn't told me to trust him. She had sent me to him because she wanted me to uncover something. "Then why did he tell me about Victor?" I asked. Daniel's voice became quieter. "Because he wanted you to believe Victor was the entire problem." Detective Harris looked at me. "Mr. Hayes, did Michael ever tell you where Emily was supposed to go?" "No." "Did he give you anything?" I remembered the photograph. I reached into my jacket and pulled it out. Detective Harris studied it carefully. "This was given to you by Michael?" "Yes." He turned it over and examined the handwriting on the back. His eyes narrowed. "This isn't Margaret's handwriting." My heart stopped. "What?" He pointed to the words written beneath the date. "Your wife's handwriting was more rounded. This was copied from something else." I looked at Daniel. "Then who wrote it?" Daniel didn't answer. Detective Harris took a photograph of the writing. "We'll have it analyzed." Suddenly, my phone vibrated. An unknown number had sent another message. I opened it with trembling fingers. There was a photograph of Emily sitting in a dimly lit room. Her hands were tied, but she was conscious. Underneath the image were 7 words. "Ask your old partner what he promised." I couldn't breathe. Detective Harris immediately told me not to respond, but I was staring at Emily's face. She looked directly into the camera as if she knew I would eventually see the photograph. Then I noticed something beside her. A small wooden bird sat on a table. My wife's wooden bird. The one that had been on the windowsill in my house for 43 years. I looked at Daniel. "How did they get that?" He looked just as confused. Then Detective Harris quietly said, "Robert, if that bird was in your house before you moved in with Emily, someone must have entered your home after Margaret died." I suddenly remembered something I had completely forgotten. 2 months before Emily asked me to move in, someone had broken into my house. Nothing valuable was stolen. At the time, I thought it was random. Now I realized it wasn't random at all. Someone had been searching for something, and whatever they were looking for had been hidden by Margaret long before she died. I turned toward the detective. "I know where we need to go." He asked where. I looked at the photograph again. My old house. But before we could leave, Daniel received a message of his own. He read it once, then handed me his phone. The message contained only one sentence. "You were warned not to bring Robert back into this." Daniel looked at me and whispered, "They know you're helping me now." And for the first time, I realized that whatever happened next might put both of us in danger.
The drive to my old house took 20 minutes, but it felt like an hour. I kept staring at the empty passenger seat, remembering how Margaret used to sit there with her hand resting on my arm. She had always said that secrets had a way of becoming heavier the longer you carried them. Now, I understood what she meant. Someone had taken Emily, someone had been watching me, and somehow my dead wife had left clues that connected everything. I just didn't know whether those clues were meant to save my daughter or reveal something I wasn't ready to face. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Let us know your city or country because your comments help keep these stories alive. Detective Harris drove behind us while Daniel sat beside me in silence. When we reached my old house, I immediately noticed something strange. The front door was locked, but the curtains in the living room were open. I always kept them closed after Margaret died. "Did you leave them like that?" Daniel asked. I shook my head. Detective Harris walked ahead and checked the door. There were no signs of forced entry. He opened it carefully and we stepped inside. The house smelled exactly as I remembered it. Old wood, dust, and the faint scent of Margaret's lavender soap. I felt a painful pressure in my chest. Every room carried a memory. Her sewing basket sat beside the couch. Her favorite chair remained near the fireplace. I almost forgot why we were there. Then Detective Harris pointed toward the hallway. "Mr. Hayes, was that cabinet always there?" I looked at the small wooden cabinet beneath the stairs. "Yes." "Did you ever open it?" I shook my head. "Margaret had always kept it locked. She used to tell me it contained things that didn't belong in a man's hands." I had laughed about it at the time. Now I wished I hadn't. Detective Harris examined the lock. It wasn't damaged. Daniel looked at me. "Do you have a key?" I remembered the brass key from the photo album. I pulled it from my pocket. It fit perfectly. Inside were old photographs, documents, and a small metal box. The box contained a USB drive, a stack of receipts, and a handwritten list of names. One name appeared at the top, Michael Reed. My hands started shaking. Beneath his name were Victor Lawson, Sarah Bennett, and Daniel Carter. I looked at Daniel. "Your name is on here." He nodded slowly. "I know." "Why?" "Because Margaret asked me to help her." Detective Harris looked sharply at him. "Help her with what?" Daniel reached for the documents but stopped himself. "She believed someone was using Emily to move money. She wanted proof before she told Robert." I stared at him. "Why didn't she tell me herself?" Daniel's eyes became wet. "Because she was afraid you would confront Michael before she could protect you." I opened the metal box. Under the documents was a second letter. Margaret's handwriting appeared again. "Robert, if you've reached this point, then the first plan failed. Don't trust the person who brings you answers too easily. The truth is closer than you think." I read the sentence twice. Then I heard a noise from upstairs. Everyone froze. Detective Harris drew his weapon and motioned for us to stay back. He slowly climbed the stairs. Daniel and I followed. The sound came from the bedroom. When Detective Harris opened the door, we found the room empty, but the window was open. On Margaret's old dresser sat a fresh cup of coffee. Someone had been there recently. Beside it was a note. Detective Harris picked it up and read it aloud. "Robert, you are looking in the wrong direction." My heart sank. Suddenly, Daniel whispered, "There's something else." He pointed toward the mirror. Written across the glass in red marker were 3 words, "Ask your daughter." I stared at the message. Emily was missing. Whoever had written it knew exactly what we were doing, but the most frightening part was what it suggested. Maybe Emily wasn't simply a victim. Maybe she knew much more about everything than she had ever admitted to me. Detective Harris immediately ordered a search of the house. While officers checked the rooms, I opened the USB drive on my old computer. There was only one video file. The date on it was 2 weeks before Margaret died. I clicked play. My wife's face appeared on the screen. She looked tired, frightened, and unlike the woman I remembered. She stared directly into the camera and said, "Robert, if you're watching this, Emily has already made her choice." The video stopped. Daniel looked at me. I couldn't speak. Then the screen came back on by itself. Margaret's voice returned. "And if she chose Daniel, you must understand why." I stared at the screen, realizing that my wife's final secret was about to change everything I believed about my daughter. My wife's face disappeared from the screen, leaving me staring at my own reflection in the dark monitor. "If she chose Daniel, you must understand why." Those words kept repeating in my head. For the first time, I wasn't wondering whether Daniel was guilty. I was wondering what my daughter had been willing to sacrifice to protect him. And if Margaret had known the truth before she died, then every argument, every secret, and every lie I had witnessed might have been part of something much bigger. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you are listening from. Tell us your city or country. Your comments mean a lot and help us know that these stories are reaching people all over the world. Detective Harris closed the laptop and looked at me. "We need to understand what your wife was trying to tell you." I nodded. "There has to be another recording." We searched the computer again, but there was only one file. Then Daniel noticed something underneath the keyboard. A tiny piece of paper had been folded into a square. He opened it carefully. Written on it were 3 numbers, 14, 6, and 22. "A date?" I asked. Daniel shook his head. "Maybe chapters." Detective Harris looked around the room. "Or something in the house." I suddenly remembered Margaret's habit of hiding things inside books. She used to say that nobody searched the books because everyone assumed secrets belonged in drawers. I walked toward the old bookshelf and began pulling out novels one by one. On the third shelf, behind an old gardening book, I found a small envelope. My name was written on it. Inside was a photograph of Emily when she was about 20 years old. She was standing beside Daniel long before they were married. I stared at the picture. "They knew each other this long." Daniel looked at it. "Yes." "Why didn't I know?" He swallowed. "Because Emily asked me never to tell you." I turned toward him. "Why?" Daniel didn't answer. Detective Harris stepped closer. "Mr. Carter, now would be a good time to stop hiding things." Daniel finally sat down. "Emily and I met when she was 20. I was working security for a company that handled private clients. We became friends first. Then we started dating." I felt betrayed. "You dated my daughter before she even finished college and I never knew." Daniel nodded. "Her mother knew." That sentence hurt more than anything else. "Margaret knew." "Yes." Daniel looked down. "She asked me to stay away from Emily because of the people I worked for." I remembered Margaret warning Emily about Daniel years ago. At the time, I had assumed it was ordinary parental concern. Now I realized there had been a reason. "Then why did Emily marry you?" I asked. Daniel looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Because I left that life for her." He explained that after he tried to leave the security company, Victor Lawson began threatening him. Emily discovered what was happening and refused to abandon him. She believed she could protect Daniel by using money from Robert's company. That was the mistake Margaret had referred to. "She stole $120,000, I said. Daniel nodded, but she didn't spend it on herself. He reached into his jacket and pulled out another document. It showed payments made to an attorney. Emily used the money to pay legal fees for people who could expose Victor. I stared at the document. "Then why keep paying him?" Daniel's voice broke. "Because Victor had evidence that could destroy Emily." What evidence? Daniel looked at Detective Harris. The night Robert's company money disappeared, Emily wasn't alone. My heart stopped. Who was with her? Daniel looked directly at me. Michael. Suddenly, everything made sense. Michael hadn't simply helped Emily. He had been there when the money was taken. He had helped her move it. He had known about Margaret's plan. He had guided me toward Victor because he wanted me to believe Victor was responsible for everything. I pulled out the photograph of Michael and studied it again. Why would Margaret tell me to ask him about October 14? Daniel answered quietly. Because October 14 was the day Michael betrayed your family. Detective Harris immediately reached for his phone. We need to find him. But before he could make the call, my phone rang. The number was Emily's. I answered with shaking hands. Emily. For several seconds there was only silence. Then I heard her breathing. Dad, I nearly collapsed with relief. Where are you? Her voice trembled. I can't tell you. Are you safe? For now. I heard another voice somewhere near her. A man. Emily whispered, Dad, listen carefully. Daniel isn't the person you need to fear. I closed my eyes. I know. She became silent. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. But Michael isn't working alone. The line suddenly went dead. Detective Harris looked at me. What did she say? I slowly lowered the phone. She said Michael has someone helping him. Daniel stepped toward me. Who? I looked at him and realized that Emily had never given me the name. But there was one person whose name had appeared repeatedly throughout everything Margaret had left behind. Sarah Bennett. And at that exact moment, Detective Harris received a message from another officer. Michael's house had been searched. He was gone. But Sarah Bennett was there, and she was holding Emily's passport. The moment Detective Harris told me that Sarah Bennett had been found holding Emily's passport, I stopped thinking about money, Victor, and even Michael. All I could think about was my daughter. Sarah had been appearing at the edges of this mystery from the beginning, always knowing more than she should, always disappearing before I could ask the right questions. Now she was sitting inside Michael's house with the one thing Emily would need if she planned to leave the country. I suddenly understood that we weren't chasing a secret anymore. We were racing against time. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you are listening from. Please subscribe and tell us in the comments where you are listening from, because every comment helps us know that you're following Robert's story with us. Detective Harris told us to stay at my old house while officers secured Michael's property. I refused. My daughter is there somewhere, and I'm not sitting here waiting. Daniel placed a hand on my shoulder. Robert, if you go there, you'll make yourself a target. I pulled away. I already am a target. He looked at me for a moment, then nodded. Then I'm coming with you. We drove behind the police cars through the dark Ohio streets. When we reached Michael's house, several officers were already outside. The front door stood open. Detective Harris met us on the porch. Sarah is inside, he said. She isn't resisting, but she won't answer questions. Where is Michael? I asked. Gone. We entered the house. Sarah sat at the dining table with her hands resting calmly in front of her. Emily's passport lay beside her. She looked at me and sighed. Robert, I was hoping you wouldn't come. Where is my daughter? She looked toward Daniel. He knows. Daniel stepped forward. Tell him. Sarah shook her head. You don't understand what Emily did. I slammed my hand against the table. Everyone keeps saying that. My daughter is missing, and all of you keep talking like I should understand some secret language. Tell me where she is. Sarah finally looked at me. She's alive. Those two words were the first comfort I had received all night. Where? Somewhere Michael can't reach her. Then why do you have her passport? Sarah looked down at it. Because Emily gave it to me. I stared at her. Why would she do that? Because she planned to disappear. Daniel's face tightened. Emily wasn't supposed to disappear yet. I turned toward him. What does that mean? He looked at Sarah. You were supposed to wait. Sarah shook her head. We waited long enough. Detective Harris stepped between them. Start from the beginning. Sarah took a deep breath. Emily discovered that Michael had been working with Victor. She found records showing that money from Robert's company was being redirected through several shell companies. She copied the files and planned to give them to the authorities. Then why didn't she? I asked. Sarah looked at Daniel. Because Michael found out. Daniel continued the story. He threatened Emily and told her that if she went to the police, he would release documents making it appear that she had stolen everything herself. I looked at Sarah. And you helped her? Yes. Then why didn't you tell me? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Because Emily didn't want you involved. She knew Michael would use you against her. Detective Harris frowned. Where is Emily now? Sarah hesitated. She was supposed to meet someone tonight. Who? Sarah looked directly at me. Margaret. My heart stopped. That's impossible. Not Margaret herself, Sarah said softly. Someone Margaret arranged for before she died. She reached into her bag and pulled out another envelope. My name was written across the front in my wife's handwriting. I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Sarah pushed it toward me. Your wife knew this day would come. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a single photograph of Emily standing outside a train station. On the back, Margaret had written, "When Robert finally learns the truth, Emily must leave before Michael finds her." I looked at Daniel. When was this written? He answered quietly, 3 months before Margaret died. I felt tears burn my eyes. My wife had been preparing for a future she knew I would never understand. Then Detective Harris's phone rang. He listened for several seconds before looking at me. We found Emily's car. I stood immediately. Where? His expression was grim. At the old train station. Sarah suddenly stood up. Then you're already too late. Why? I asked. She looked toward the window. Because Michael knew about that station. A cold silence filled the room. Then, from somewhere outside, we heard the sound of a car accelerating away. Detective Harris ran toward the door. Daniel followed. I remained frozen for 1 second, staring at Margaret's photograph. Then I noticed something I hadn't seen before. In the background, standing behind Emily at the train station, was a man watching her. I recognized him immediately. It wasn't Michael. It wasn't Victor. It was someone I had trusted for years. And suddenly, I understood why Margaret had written, "The truth is closer than you think." The man standing behind Emily in Margaret's photograph was the last person I expected to see. I knew him. I had invited him into my home, trusted him with my business, and even asked him to help me after Margaret died. Yet there he was, watching my daughter at the train station months before I even knew she was in danger. I stared at the photograph until my hands began to shake. I finally understood what Margaret meant when she wrote that the truth was closer than I thought. The truth had been standing beside me for years. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you are listening from. Please subscribe and tell us in the comments where you are listening from, because your support helps these stories reach more people. I turned the photograph toward Daniel. It's him. Daniel looked at the image and immediately recognized the man. Robert, don't say his name here. Detective Harris stepped closer. Who is it? I swallowed. James Carter. Daniel went completely still. James was his father. My stomach twisted as Daniel stared at the photograph. My father, he whispered. Why would he be watching Emily? I didn't have an answer. James had always been polite to me. He had attended Emily and Daniel's wedding. He had helped Margaret during her illness. After Margaret died, he even called me every few weeks to check on me. How could that man have been connected to everything? Sarah suddenly spoke. James wasn't working for Victor. We all turned toward her. Then what was he doing? Daniel asked. Sarah lowered her voice. He was trying to protect Daniel. Daniel looked confused. From what? Sarah explained that James had discovered the truth about Victor years earlier. He knew Daniel had become trapped in a dangerous situation, and he also knew Emily had become involved because she loved Daniel. James secretly worked with Margaret to create a plan that would eventually expose Michael and Victor. But the plan had a problem. Michael discovered part of it. "So my father knew about all of this?" Daniel asked. Sarah nodded. "Yes." Daniel stepped away from the table. "Why didn't he tell me?" "Because he didn't trust you with the information." Daniel looked hurt. "He was my father." Sarah's voice softened. "He was afraid you would confront Michael before they were ready." I looked at the photograph again. "Then why did Margaret never tell me?" Sarah answered. "Because she knew you would try to solve everything yourself." I almost laughed. She was right. Margaret had known me better than anyone. She knew that if I believed Emily was in danger, I would run straight toward it without thinking. Detective Harris interrupted. "Where is James now?" Daniel took out his phone. He called his father. No answer. He tried again. Nothing. Then his phone received a message. It was from James. "I'm sorry, son. I should have told you everything." Daniel read the rest silently. "What does it say?" I asked. He handed me the phone. "Michael knows where Emily is. He has taken her to the place where this started." I looked at Daniel. "Where?" He shook his head. "I don't know." Sarah suddenly spoke. "I do." Everyone looked at her. 4 years ago, Emily took the money from Robert's company at a warehouse outside Dayton. That's where Michael first threatened her. Detective Harris immediately called for the address. We left within minutes. During the drive, Daniel barely spoke. I could see how much his father's betrayal, or secrecy, was hurting him. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Daniel, your father may have been trying to protect you." He looked at me. "And if he failed," I had no answer. When we reached the warehouse, the building was dark. The police surrounded the area. Detective Harris ordered us to stay behind the vehicles. Then we heard a woman scream from inside. "Emily!" I shouted. Daniel grabbed my arm. "Robert, wait!" But I pulled away. We rushed toward the entrance with Detective Harris behind us. Inside, the warehouse was almost completely empty. A single light hung from the ceiling. Emily was sitting in a chair near the center of the room, frightened but alive. Beside her stood Michael, and behind him was James Carter. I stared at Daniel's father. "James?" He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Robert, I'm sorry." Daniel stepped forward. "Dad, what are you doing?" James looked at his son, then at Emily. "I was trying to end this before Michael killed someone." Michael suddenly laughed. "You're too late." He reached into his coat. Detective Harris drew his weapon. Everything happened at once. A gunshot echoed through the warehouse. Emily screamed. Daniel pulled me to the ground. When I looked up, James was standing between Michael and Emily. He had been shot. Daniel crawled toward his father. "Dad!" James collapsed into his son's arms. His eyes found mine. "Robert," he whispered, "Margaret was right about one thing." I moved closer. "What?" He struggled to breathe. "You must forgive Emily." Then his eyes closed. And as the sirens grew louder outside, I realized the secret Margaret had spent years protecting was finally going to cost our family everything. The sound of James Carter's body hitting the concrete floor is something I will never forget. One moment he was speaking to me, telling me to forgive my daughter. The next, Daniel was holding him in his arms while blood spread across his shirt. Michael was on the ground, surrounded by police officers, but I barely noticed him. All I could see was Daniel's face as he realized his father was dying. And then Emily began screaming my name. That was when I understood that whatever happened next would change our family forever. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Tell us your city or country, because your support means a lot and helps these stories reach people who connect with emotional family stories. Detective Harris immediately called for an ambulance. Officers secured Michael while paramedics rushed inside. Emily was freed from the chair and I ran toward her. She grabbed me so tightly that I could barely breathe. "Dad, I'm sorry," she kept saying. "I'm so sorry." I held her against my chest. For the first time in weeks, I had my daughter back, but I couldn't celebrate. Daniel was still kneeling beside his father. "Stay with me, Dad," he whispered. James opened his eyes for a moment. "Daniel, I'm here. Take care of her." Daniel nodded through tears. "I will." James looked toward Emily. "She was worth it." Then his eyes closed again. The paramedics worked on him for several minutes before carrying him outside. Daniel followed them into the ambulance. Emily and I were left standing inside the warehouse. She looked older than she had when I last saw her. "Tell me everything," I said. She wiped her tears. "I wanted to." "Then why didn't you?" She looked toward the floor. "Because Mom made me promise." I felt my heart tighten. "Your mother," Emily nodded. "Mom knew about Victor. She knew about Michael. She knew Daniel was trying to leave that world, but she also knew you would destroy yourself trying to fix everything. So she made you lie to me." Emily shook her head. "She made me promise to keep you alive." I stared at her. "Alive?" "Dad, Victor threatened you." She explained that after Margaret discovered the truth, Victor began watching our family. Margaret became terrified that if I confronted him, he would hurt me. So she created a plan with James and Daniel. Emily would appear to be responsible for the missing money while Daniel secretly collected evidence against Michael and Victor. "But why did you let me believe Daniel was hurting you?" I asked. "Because it was the only way to keep you away." I closed my eyes. All those months of suspicion had been built on a lie designed to protect me. Then Emily whispered, "There was one thing Mom didn't know." I looked at her. "What?" She hesitated. "Michael wasn't the only person working with Victor." My stomach tightened. "Who else?" Emily looked toward the ambulance lights outside. "Someone inside the police department." Detective Harris suddenly approached us. His expression was serious. "Emily, I need you to come with me." She looked frightened. "Why?" He glanced at me. "We found something in Michael's warehouse." He handed me a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a small recorder. "What is it?" I asked. Michael had been recording conversations. Emily stared at it. "Don't play it." Detective Harris looked at her. "Why?" "Because you'll hear something you weren't supposed to hear." He placed the recorder on a nearby table. I pressed play. Michael's voice filled the warehouse. "Once Robert is gone, Emily will have no reason to keep fighting." Another man's voice answered. "And Daniel," Michael laughed. "He'll take the blame." Emily covered her mouth. I looked at Daniel, who had returned from the ambulance. "Your father?" I asked. Daniel shook his head. "No." We listened again. The second voice became clearer. I recognized it immediately. It was a voice I had heard countless times during the investigation. Detective Harris's voice. My blood ran cold. Emily looked at me. "Dad." Detective Harris suddenly stepped backward. His face had gone pale. He reached for his radio, but before he could speak, another officer grabbed his arm. "Detective, you're under arrest." Harris stared at him in disbelief. The room fell silent. I thought the nightmare was finally ending. Then Daniel's phone rang. He answered, listened, and slowly lowered it. "Robert," he whispered. "The hospital called." I knew from his face that something was wrong. "What happened?" Daniel's voice broke. "My father didn't survive the surgery." Emily began crying. I stood completely still. James had sacrificed himself to save my daughter, and now he was gone. But before we could process his death, Daniel received another message. This time, it was from an unknown number. It contained only one sentence. James was only the beginning. James Carter was dead, and his final words kept echoing inside my head. "Take care of her." I had spent weeks believing Daniel was the danger, then Michael, then Victor, and finally Detective Harris. Every time I thought we had reached the end of the nightmare, another layer appeared beneath it. But the message on Daniel's phone, "James was only the beginning," made one thing clear. Whoever was behind all of this wasn't finished. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you are listening from. Tell us your city or country, because your support helps these stories reach people who enjoy emotional family mysteries. Detective Harris was taken away by two officers while another detective secured the recorder as evidence. I watched him disappear through the warehouse doors without saying a word. A few hours earlier, I had trusted him completely. Now I couldn't even trust my own instincts. Daniel stood beside Emily, holding her hand. She looked exhausted. "Dad," she said quietly, "there's something else you need to know." I looked at her. "What now?" She reached into her coat and pulled out a small envelope. Mom gave me this before she died. My heart sank when I saw Margaret's handwriting. Why didn't you show me this before? Emily looked ashamed. Because she told me not to until you knew about James. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph of Margaret, James, and Daniel sitting together at a restaurant. The date was printed beneath it, 8 months before Margaret died. On the back, Margaret had written, "If James falls, Daniel must finish what we started." I looked at Daniel. "What did you start?" He took a long breath. "A case against Victor and everyone helping him." He explained that James had spent years secretly collecting evidence. Margaret helped organize it. Daniel continued the work after her death, but they never had enough proof to expose the entire network. "Then where is the evidence?" I asked. Daniel looked at Emily. She slowly shook her head. "I don't know. I noticed something inside the envelope." A tiny key had been taped beneath the photograph. It wasn't the same brass key I had found before. This one was silver and had a number engraved on it, 314. "What does this open?" I asked. Daniel immediately recognized it. "A storage unit." We drove to a storage facility on the edge of town. Daniel knew the location because James had once mentioned it, but he had never given him the unit number. The silver key solved that mystery. Unit 314 was at the end of a dark corridor. Inside was almost nothing: a folding chair, several cardboard boxes, and an old wooden trunk. Daniel opened the trunk. Documents filled the bottom: bank records, photographs, audio tapes, copies of police reports. But there was one file labeled with my name. I opened it and found records showing that someone had been monitoring me for almost 2 years. My phone calls, my bank accounts, my movements, even visits to the doctor. I felt sick. They were watching me before Margaret died. Daniel nodded. That's why she was afraid. Emily suddenly pulled out another document. Her face changed as she read it. "Dad," I looked at her. "What?" She handed me the paper. It was a life insurance policy. Margaret had changed the beneficiary shortly before her death. I expected to see my name. Instead, the beneficiary was Emily. But the policy wasn't the shocking part. The policy was worth $2 million. "Why would Mom leave this to you?" I asked. Emily started crying. "Because she knew someone would try to use you to get to me." Then Daniel found a second document. It was a contract signed by Michael and Victor. At the bottom was another signature. I recognized it immediately. My own signature. I stared at it in disbelief. "I never signed this." Daniel looked closer. "Someone forged your name." I turned the page. The contract dated back to October 14, the same day Emily had taken the money. Suddenly, I understood why Margaret had sent me to Michael. She hadn't wanted me to discover that Emily stole from my company. She wanted me to discover that someone had used my identity to make it look like she did. But there was one final page missing. Daniel searched the boxes frantically. "The last page isn't here." Emily looked toward the door. "Then someone already took it." A noise came from the hallway. We all froze. Footsteps stopped outside the storage unit. Daniel quietly moved in front of Emily. The door began to open. I expected Michael. I expected Victor. Instead, an elderly woman stood there holding Margaret's old wooden bird. She looked directly at me and said, "Robert, your wife asked me to find you when the time came." Then she added the words that made my heart stop. "And I'm afraid I'm already too late." The elderly woman standing outside the storage unit held Margaret's wooden bird in both hands, as carefully as if it were something alive. I recognized it immediately. Margaret had kept that little wooden bird on our windowsill for more than 40 years. Seeing it in the hands of a stranger made my chest tighten, but her words frightened me even more. "Your wife asked me to find you when the time came, and I'm afraid I'm already too late." I stepped toward her. "Who are you?" She looked at Emily first, then Daniel, before finally meeting my eyes. "My name is Helen Brooks. Margaret and I worked together on something you were never supposed to know about." Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Let us know where you're watching from, because every comment helps us continue bringing these emotional stories to you. Helen entered the storage unit and closed the door behind her. She placed the wooden bird on the table and removed a small key hidden underneath it. "Margaret gave me this 2 weeks before she died," she said. "She told me that if anything happened to her, I was to keep it safe until Emily and Daniel were together again." Emily stared at her. "Why me?" Helen's expression softened. "Because your mother believed you were the only person who could finish what she started." Helen opened the wooden bird. I had never realized it was hollow. Inside was a tiny memory card sealed inside plastic. Daniel connected it to a laptop. A video appeared. Margaret was sitting in our old living room. She looked tired, but her eyes were clear. "Robert," she said, "if Helen has brought this to you, then the people we feared have finally exposed themselves." I felt tears rise in my eyes. Margaret continued, "The money Emily took was never the real problem. The real problem was the company account itself. Someone had been using Robert's business to move illegal payments for years." I looked at Daniel. He nodded. "Michael," he whispered. Margaret's video continued. "Michael created false contracts using Robert's identity. He moved money through accounts and made it appear that Emily was responsible. But he wasn't working alone." Margaret paused. "The person helping him was someone inside our family." The video suddenly froze. Helen looked at me. "The file was damaged. That's all we recovered." I felt frustrated. "Then we still don't know who the second person was." Helen shook her head. "Actually, we do." She opened a folder and handed me a photograph. It showed Michael standing beside Victor. Behind them was a woman I had seen before. She was standing beside Emily at a charity event years earlier. "Sarah Bennett." "Sarah?" Emily whispered. Helen nodded. "She worked for Michael before becoming your daughter's friend." Emily stepped backward. "No, Sarah saved me." "She did," Helen said. "But she also betrayed you." The truth was becoming harder to absorb. Sarah had helped Emily escape, warned us about Michael, and given us information. But if she had been involved from the beginning, how much of what she told us was true? Helen explained that Sarah had originally worked for Michael as an accountant. She knew about the hidden accounts and helped create false records. Later, she became close to Emily because she was ordered to monitor her. But somewhere along the way, Sarah genuinely cared about Emily and decided to help her escape. "That's why she gave you the passport," Helen said. "She wanted Emily to disappear before Michael could find her." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "So Sarah was both protecting me and betraying me." Helen nodded sadly. "Sometimes people become trapped between the person they were and the person they want to become." I looked at the documents again. "Where is Sarah now?" Helen's expression changed. "That's why I said you're too late." She pulled out a newspaper clipping. Sarah had been found unconscious in a motel room that morning. No one knew who had attacked her. Detective Harris was already in custody, Michael had disappeared, and Victor was still free. Then Helen handed me one final envelope. "Margaret told me never to open this. Only you can." I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. "Robert, I know you will want to protect Emily, but there will come a moment when protecting her means accepting that she may hate you. Don't let your fear make the decision for you." I looked at my daughter. She was crying silently. "Dad," she whispered, "what did Mom mean?" Before I could answer, Helen's phone rang. She listened for several seconds, then looked at me with horror. "Victor has Emily's location." I turned toward my daughter. "What?" Helen's voice trembled. "He knows you're here." The storage facility lights suddenly went out. In the darkness, a car door slammed somewhere outside. Then we heard footsteps approaching our unit. Someone had found us. The footsteps outside the storage unit stopped directly in front of our door. For several seconds, nobody moved. Emily was beside me. Daniel stood between her and the entrance, and Helen held the wooden bird against her chest. Then the metal handle slowly moved downward. Detective Harris was in custody. Michael was missing. Victor knew our location. There was no one left to trust. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Let us know your city or country, because knowing where you're watching from makes these stories feel much more personal. Daniel quickly switched off the laptop and placed the memory card inside his pocket. "Back door," he whispered. Helen shook her head. "There isn't one." Daniel pointed toward the storage wall. "There is." He pulled aside several cardboard boxes and revealed a narrow maintenance door hidden behind them. "James showed me this years ago." We squeezed through one at a time. The passage was dark and barely wide enough for a person. I could hear Emily breathing behind me. Halfway through, a loud crash came from the storage unit. Someone had forced the door open. We continued until we reached a metal exit leading into an alley behind the facility. Detective Harris had given Daniel a small emergency phone earlier, and Daniel immediately called the officers waiting outside. But before anyone arrived, a black SUV turned into the alley. "Run," Daniel whispered. We scattered in different directions. Emily grabbed my hand and we ran toward the main road. I could hear an engine behind us. A vehicle accelerated, then stopped suddenly. Daniel had thrown a metal trash container into the road, blocking the SUV. We reached a police cruiser at the end of the street and officers rushed toward us. The SUV sped away before they could reach it. For the first time that night, I felt a small amount of relief, but it didn't last. Helen was missing. We had assumed she was behind us, but she had never reached the alley. Daniel wanted to go back, but the officers stopped him. "The building is being secured," one officer said. "We'll find her." I watched the storage facility doors close and realized Margaret's friend had risked everything to help us. An hour later, the police found Helen unconscious inside the facility. She was alive but badly injured. Before paramedics took her away, she grabbed my hand. "Robert," she whispered, "don't let Emily go to the hospital." I stared at her. "Why?" Helen struggled to speak. "Someone there is working for Victor." Then she lost consciousness. Daniel immediately understood. "We can't take Emily to a normal hospital." Emily looked frightened. "Where do we go?" I thought about James, Margaret, and the plan they had built over years. There had to be somewhere safe. Then I remembered an old property Margaret and I owned near Lake Erie. We hadn't visited it since before she became sick. It was isolated, surrounded by woods, and almost nobody knew about it. We drove there before dawn. The house was dark and dusty, but still secure. Daniel checked every room while I helped Emily inside. She sat beside the fireplace, staring at the floor. "Dad," she said, "I need to tell you something before anyone else finds us." I sat beside her. "What?" She took a long breath. "The money wasn't $120,000. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I took more." My heart sank. "How much?" She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Almost $300,000. I couldn't speak. Emily explained that she had taken the additional money because Michael threatened to expose Daniel's past. She believed paying him would make the danger disappear. Instead, it made everything worse. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Because Mom told me that if I told you, you would sell everything to protect me." I looked toward the window. She was right. Emily reached for my hand. "Dad, I never wanted to hurt you." I squeezed her fingers. "I know." Daniel returned from the hallway. His face was pale. "Robert, we have a problem." "What now?" He held up his phone. A new message had arrived. It contained a photograph of the lake house. Someone had taken it recently. Beneath the picture were 4 words: "You can't hide forever." Emily stared at the screen. Then she whispered something that made both Daniel and me freeze. "I know who took that picture." I turned toward her. "Who?" She looked at Daniel. "My brother." Daniel's face went completely white. "Emily, you don't have a brother." She shook her head slowly. "I didn't, but Victor does." And suddenly, the person we had been searching for was no longer a stranger. He was connected to Emily in a way none of us had imagined. When Emily told me that Victor had a brother connected to her, I felt as though the floor had shifted beneath me. Daniel was staring at his wife with the same confusion I felt. "What do you mean, Victor has a brother?" he asked. Emily looked toward the window before answering. "His name is Adrian Lawson, and he isn't just Victor's brother. He is the reason this whole thing started. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. Tell us in the comments where you are listening from, because your support helps us continue sharing stories about families, secrets, and the choices that change our lives forever." Emily explained that she had met Adrian 4 years earlier, shortly before she discovered what Victor was doing. Unlike Victor, Adrian had wanted nothing to do with his brother's business. He had actually tried to expose him, but Adrian had one weakness. He was deeply in debt, and Victor used that weakness to control him. "How does he know you?" I asked. Emily hesitated. "Because Adrian was the person who first warned me about Victor." Daniel looked at her. "Then why would he be watching us now?" Emily shook her head. "He isn't." She pointed toward the photograph on Daniel's phone. "Look at the reflection in the window." I took the phone and enlarged the image. In the reflection, I could see the outline of a man standing beside the camera. Emily stared at it. "That's not Adrian." Daniel leaned closer. "Then who is it?" Emily whispered, "Michael." My stomach tightened. Michael was still alive, still free, and still watching us. But why would Emily tell us Victor had a brother if Michael was the person outside? She explained that Adrian had contacted her 3 days earlier and told her something terrifying. Victor planned to make Michael disappear and blame everything on him. Michael knew he was being sacrificed, so he had begun threatening everyone connected to the case. "Then Michael isn't working for Victor anymore," I said. "He's trying to save himself." Emily nodded. "Exactly." For the first time, I realized that the people around us weren't divided into simple heroes and villains. Everyone had been making desperate choices to survive. Some choices had protected others. Some had destroyed them. Then Daniel received a message from an unknown number. It contained an address and one sentence: "Bring Robert alone." I immediately shook my head. "No," Daniel looked at me, "it could be Michael. That's why I can't go alone." Emily stood up. "Dad, don't go." I looked at my daughter. She had spent years trying to protect me by keeping me away from the truth. Now I understood why. She wasn't afraid that I would judge her. She was afraid that loving her would make me reckless. "Emily," I said softly, "your mother spent years trying to protect me. James died protecting you. I'm not going to let another person die because of us." Daniel insisted on coming with me, but I made him promise to stay close enough to intervene only if necessary. The address led us to an abandoned roadside motel. The place looked deserted, but one room had a light on. I entered alone. Michael was sitting beside the window, older and more exhausted than I had ever seen him. He raised both hands. "I'm not here to hurt you." "Where is Emily?" "Safe." "Then why bring me here?" Michael looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Because you deserve to know what Margaret never told you." He placed a folder on the table. Inside were medical records, bank statements, and a letter from Margaret. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Michael spoke quietly. "Your wife was sick long before you knew." I stared at him. "What are you saying?" "Margaret knew she didn't have much time. She was afraid that after she died, Victor would use Emily's mistakes to control your family." My hands began trembling. Michael continued. "She made me promise to help Daniel expose Victor. But then I made my own mistake. I started taking money." "Why?" "Because Victor threatened my son." I looked at him in disbelief. "You destroyed my company because of your son." Michael lowered his head. "I thought I could fix it before you ever found out." I wanted to hate him, but suddenly I understood the desperation behind his betrayal. Then he pushed one final document toward me. It was a hospital record dated 2 years earlier. Margaret's diagnosis was listed at the top, but there was something else beneath it, a second patient's name: Emily Hayes Carter. I stared at the page. "Why was my daughter in the hospital with Margaret?" Michael looked at me sadly. "Because the night Margaret died, Emily wasn't with Daniel." He paused. "She was there with her mother." My heart stopped. Why? Michael's answer destroyed the last piece of certainty I had. Because Margaret didn't die naturally. Then the motel door behind me slowly opened. Daniel stood there, pale and breathless. "Robert," he whispered, "we have to leave, right now." I turned toward him. "Why?" He looked at the hospital record in my hands. "Because Emily finally remembered what happened that night." And from the expression on his face, I knew the truth about Margaret's death was far worse than anything we had imagined. When Daniel told me Emily had finally remembered what happened the night Margaret died, I couldn't move. For almost 2 years, I had believed my wife had lost her battle with illness. I had held her hand in the hospital, kissed her forehead, and watched her take her final breath. Now Michael was telling me she hadn't died naturally, and Daniel was telling me my daughter remembered something from that night. I didn't know which truth frightened me more. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. Please subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're listening from, and let us know where you're listening from. Every comment helps these stories reach people who are following Robert's journey. Daniel grabbed my arm. "We need to leave." "Not until you tell me what happened." "Robert, if Michael is telling the truth, someone may already know that you're here." I looked toward Michael. "Are you coming?" He shook his head. "No, if I leave with you, they'll follow." He handed me the hospital record. "Take this. Give it to Emily." We hurried outside and drove back toward the lake house. I couldn't stop looking at Margaret's medical record. Her diagnosis was real, but something didn't fit. The document showed a medication she had never been prescribed before. I remembered asking the doctor about it after her death. He had told me it was part of her treatment. Now I wondered if that had been true. When we reached the house, Emily was waiting by the window. The moment she saw my face, she knew something had changed. "Dad," she whispered, "you know." I held up the record. "Tell me what happened." Emily sat down slowly. "Mom knew she was dying. She also knew someone was trying to make her death look natural." My heart broke. "Who?" "Victor." Emily explained that Margaret had discovered Victor was using my company to move illegal money. She had gathered enough evidence to expose him, but she knew she wouldn't survive long enough to finish the case. So she created a backup plan. She gave copies of the evidence to James, Daniel, and Helen. But someone discovered the plan. "Michael?" I asked. Emily shook her head. "No, Michael betrayed us later. The person who found out first was someone at the hospital." I felt cold. "The doctor," Emily nodded. "Dr. Thomas Walker." The name hit me like a punch. Thomas had been our family doctor for years. He had treated Margaret. He had attended her final days. He had stood beside me when she died. "Why would he do that?" Emily whispered. "Because Victor had something against him," Daniel interrupted. "The doctor changed one of Margaret's medications." I looked at the record again. The strange medication suddenly made sense. "Did he kill her?" Emily's eyes filled with tears. "He didn't mean to." I stared at her. "What does that mean?" "Victor ordered him to make her weaker." But the medication interacted with another drug Margaret was taking. Her heart stopped. I couldn't breathe. My wife had been murdered because someone wanted to silence her. But Emily wasn't finished. "The worst part is that Mom knew it might happen." She explained that Margaret had secretly recorded a conversation with Dr. Walker. The recording proved he had been pressured by Victor. But Margaret never released it because she feared Victor would retaliate against me and Emily. "Why did you know about this?" I asked. Emily looked down. "Because I was there when Mom confronted him." Tears rolled down her face. "She made me promise not to tell you until I knew you were safe." I felt anger, grief, and betrayal all at once. "You let me believe she died naturally." Emily began crying. "I was 20 feet away from you when she died, Dad. I wanted to tell you, but Mom squeezed my hand and shook her head." I closed my eyes. Suddenly, every memory of Margaret's final night changed. Her eyes, her weak smile, her whispered, "I love you." I had thought she was saying goodbye. Maybe she had been warning me. Then Daniel placed a small recorder on the table. "We found this inside the evidence box." I pressed play. Margaret's voice filled the room. "Robert, if you're hearing this, then Emily finally told you. Please don't spend the rest of your life hating yourself." I began crying. Margaret continued, "You couldn't have saved me, but you can still save our daughter." The recording ended. Emily covered her face. I pulled her into my arms. For the first time in years, I wasn't angry with her. I was simply her father again. But then Daniel looked toward the window. A car had stopped on the road outside. He recognized it immediately. "That's Dr. Walker's car." My blood ran cold. "Why is he here?" Daniel stepped away from the window. "Because he knows we found the recording." The car door opened. Dr. Walker stepped out. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding something much worse, a photograph of Margaret from her final night, and written across the bottom were 6 words. She wasn't the only one who knew. The photograph Dr. Walker held outside the lake house showed Margaret on the night she died. But there was something in the background that made my blood run cold. I recognized the room immediately. It was the hospital corridor outside Margaret's room, and standing beside the doorway was Emily. But Emily wasn't alone. Someone was standing behind her, and that person was holding Margaret's wooden bird. I stared at the photograph and realized the message beneath it wasn't a threat. It was a warning. She wasn't the only one who knew. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Let us know where you're watching from and what part of the world you're listening from. Your comments help us know that these stories are reaching people who follow emotional family mysteries all the way to the end. Dr. Walker slowly raised both hands. "Robert, I didn't come here to hurt anyone." Daniel stepped between him and Emily. "Then why are you holding that photograph?" Dr. Walker looked exhausted. "Because you deserve to know what really happened." I opened the door but didn't let him inside. "Start talking." He looked toward the road. "Victor forced me to change Margaret's medication. I thought it would only make her weaker. I didn't know it would kill her." My hands tightened around the door. "Who else knew?" Dr. Walker looked directly at Emily. "Your daughter." Emily began crying. "I knew about the medication, Dad. I didn't know Mom would die." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because Mom made me promise." Dr. Walker continued, "Margaret knew she had been poisoned. Before she died, she asked me to help her record a statement. She wanted evidence against Victor." He pulled a small recorder from his coat. "But someone stole the original." "Who?" I asked. He looked at the photograph. "Michael." That name felt like a curse. Michael had betrayed me, helped Victor, then later tried to protect Emily. Every person seemed to have played 2 different roles. Dr. Walker handed me the recorder. "This is a copy." I pressed play. Margaret's voice filled the room. "If Robert hears this, tell him I loved him enough to keep him out of this." My eyes filled with tears. Then she continued, "But there is something Robert must understand. Emily didn't steal the money alone. I asked her to take it." Emily covered her mouth. I looked at her. "What?" Margaret's recording explained that the $120,000 was used to buy evidence from someone inside Victor's organization. Margaret had planned to expose the entire network, but she needed someone to move the money without attracting attention. She chose Emily because nobody would suspect her. The plan went wrong when Michael discovered it. He stole additional money and used Emily's name to cover his own actions. "So Emily wasn't the person who betrayed me," I whispered. "She was trying to help Mom." Emily nodded through tears. "I thought I could finish what she started." The recording continued. Margaret said one final thing before the audio ended. "Robert, when you learn everything, don't punish yourself. The only thing I ask is that you forgive Emily. She will need you more than you know." I couldn't hold back my tears. I walked toward my daughter and pulled her into my arms. She cried against my chest like the little girl who used to hide behind me during thunderstorms. For a moment, the years between us disappeared. Then Dr. Walker's phone rang. He looked at the screen and froze. "Victor," he answered on speaker. Victor's voice came through clearly. "You have the recording." Dr. Walker didn't respond. Victor continued, "Then you know what happens next." Daniel stepped closer. Where is Michael? Victor laughed. Michael is dead. I felt numb. When? An hour ago. Daniel looked at me. Victor continued, you should have stopped looking, Robert. Margaret understood that. That's why she tried to protect you. I stepped toward the phone. You killed my wife. There was silence. Then Victor said, no, I gave the order. Someone else carried it out. I froze. Who? Victor laughed softly. Ask the man standing beside you. I looked at Daniel. He was staring at me in shock. What does he mean? I asked. Daniel shook his head. I don't know. Victor's voice returned. Your son-in-law knows more than he's told you. The call ended. Emily looked at Daniel. Is it true? Daniel didn't answer. I felt my heart sink. After everything we'd survived, one question remained. Had Daniel really been protecting my daughter all these years, or had he been protecting himself? Then Daniel finally spoke. Robert, there's something I never told you about the night Margaret died. His voice trembled. I was there, and before I could ask what he had done, the lights inside the house suddenly went out. The lights went out, and for a few seconds, nobody moved. I could hear Emily breathing beside me and Daniel standing somewhere near the table. Then the emergency lights from outside the house flickered through the windows. I turned toward Daniel. You were there the night Margaret died. What aren't you telling me? He lowered his head. I was there because Margaret asked me to come. Emily stepped closer. Daniel, tell him everything. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. Your wife knew Victor was planning to kill her. She asked me to help her get the evidence out of the hospital. I stared at him. Then why did Victor say you knew more? Daniel swallowed. Because I arrived too late. He explained that when he reached Margaret's hospital room, Dr. Walker had already changed her medication. Daniel confronted him, but Margaret stopped him. She knew that if Daniel attacked the doctor, Victor would know the evidence had been discovered. Instead, Margaret gave Daniel a small envelope and told him to protect Emily. What was in the envelope? I asked. Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph. It showed Margaret, Emily, and me together. On the back was a message in Margaret's handwriting. Keep them together. Daniel's voice broke. That was the last thing she asked me to do. I looked at Emily. Suddenly, I understood why Daniel had spent years pushing me away whenever I got close to the truth. He wasn't protecting himself. He was trying to keep Margaret's final promise, but there was still one question. Why didn't you tell me? Daniel looked at me. Because Margaret made me swear that I wouldn't. She knew you'd blame yourself. She knew you'd go after Victor, and she knew you might not come back. I felt tears running down my face. I spent 2 years believing I failed her. Daniel shook his head. She never believed that. Emily stepped toward me and held my hand. Dad, Mom loved you until her last breath. Outside, police vehicles suddenly arrived. Dr. Walker had contacted them before coming to the house. Victor's network was finally being exposed. Officers had arrested several people connected to the operation. Victor himself was captured the following morning while trying to cross the state line. For the first time in years, there was no one left for us to run from. But justice didn't feel like victory. Michael was dead. James was dead. Margaret was gone. Helen survived, but she never fully recovered from her injuries. Dr. Walker testified against Victor and received a reduced sentence for cooperating. Sarah survived her attack and eventually gave investigators everything she knew. Daniel stayed beside Emily through every hearing and every painful memory, and I went home alone. Months passed. The house became painfully quiet. Margaret's chair remained beside the window. I couldn't move it. I couldn't replace the photographs. I couldn't throw away her clothes. Emily visited every Sunday, but our relationship was different now. We loved each other more honestly, but the years of secrets had left scars neither of us could erase. One winter morning, Emily arrived with tears in her eyes. She was holding an envelope. Dad, this came from Mom's lawyer. I opened it. Inside was one final letter. Margaret had written it shortly before her death. Robert, if you're reading this, then you've finally learned everything. Please don't spend your remaining years searching for someone to blame. I made choices. Emily made choices. Daniel made choices. Even the people who hurt us believed they were choosing something they needed. But through all of it, I never stopped loving you. My greatest fear wasn't dying. It was leaving you alone. I had to stop reading because my hands were shaking. The final line said, "When you miss me, don't visit my grave. Sit by the window and remember the man I fell in love with." I walked to the window where Margaret's wooden bird had always stood. I placed it there again. Emily stood beside me. Neither of us spoke. Years later, I still think about that night. People ask me whether justice made the pain easier. It didn't. The truth gave us answers, but it never gave us Margaret back. Sometimes the hardest ending isn't losing the person you love. It's waking up every morning knowing you survived when they didn't. I kept Margaret's letter until the day I died. And on the final evening of my life, I sat beside that same window, holding the wooden bird in my hands. I looked at Emily, who was sitting beside me, and whispered, "Your mother kept her promise. She brought us home." Emily began to cry. I closed my eyes and imagined Margaret sitting across from me, smiling the way she had before everything changed. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of saying goodbye. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what country or city you're listening from, and if you would like to hear another emotional family story, stay with Heartline Narratives. Thank you for listening.